What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so let's talk about something that Gilbert Arenas said recently that has pissed off a lot of people, including myself. And it has to do with the great Bill Russell, the late great Bill Russell. And the fact that Gilbert Arenas fixed his mouth to say something this historically inaccurate really, and not only just is it historically inaccurate, but the way that he framed this argument for Jokic, no matter how you feel about Jokic versus Bill Russell, it's intellectually dishonest. And not only that, the format in which he went on to say this, the situational awareness when it comes to Nikola Jokic is just, when it comes to Gilbert Arenas, about Nikola Jokic and Bill Russell, that situation, Gilbert Arenas is just, man, it's just ridiculous. So look, man, Gilbert Arenas thinks that Nikola Jokic is a top 5 all-time center. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's outlandish, considering that Jokic has 3 MVPs, right? But I still think that Jokic needs to accomplish more, and I'll tell you why. I think I'll make a pretty good argument for that. But the fact that he wants to take out Bill Russell, 11-time NBA champion, second all-time in rebounding, still considered by the majority of basketball fans at least a top 1 to top 2 defensive player in the history of the game, one of the most prolific shot blockers the game has ever seen, the defensive anchor of those dynasty Celtic teams, whether you want to say those teams were superpowered, whatever the case may be. Before he arrived on those teams, those Celtics teams were mediocre. After he retired, until they're able to replenish some of the talent, those Celtics teams were mediocre in the early 70s. So you still got to give Bill Russell his props. But this is what Gilbert Arenas said when it comes to Jokic. For Jokic, talking about top 5 center, I'm knocking off Bill Russell. Let's be honest. He played in the 60s. Yeah, so there's 6, 7 black players in the league at that time. And what amazes me is that these articles don't correct that factual inaccuracy that Gilbert Arenas stated. And the main reason why that is because they agree with what he's saying. They agree. So they're not going to even try to be objective and counter that factual inaccuracy. They're just going to let it slide and have that factual inaccuracy put out there to help persuade the viewer or the viewer of the article, the reader, to be swayed into believing whatever Gilbert Arenas believes, because these guys don't care about the history of the NBA. They don't. I've said it time and time again. These guys don't give a fuck about these players. They don't care about the history of the game. And we're starting to see this happen in football, and we're starting to see this happen in Major League Baseball. These prisoners of the moment who all of a sudden are saying that Shohei Ohtani is the greatest player ever. He's better than Willie Mays. He's better than Babe Ruth. He's better than Hank Aaron. We're starting to see these shitballs saying that Saquon Barkley is the greatest running back ever. They don't know a damn thing about anything that happened more than 15, 20 years ago. I hate them. I hate these motherfuckers with a passion in my heart. Look, first of all, when Bill Russell first entered the league in 1956, right? Contrary to what this moron is saying, I would say the league was probably at that time 10% black. 10% black. Now, remember, when Bill Russell played, there was anywhere between 8 to 14 teams, right? So it's true, and I've said this before, there was this perception and this belief by the NBA front offices in the 50s and the early 60s that fans weren't going to pay to watch black players. They wanted to see people who they thought they wanted to see people who they could identify with. I mean, remember, when Bill Russell entered the league, that was still we were less than 10 years removed from Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball. So there was still a lot of this old-timey, old school front office guys who felt like we got to have a certain quota of white players. So even if the black players were kicking the white players' asses in practice, the white players were going to start. But that was starting to fade. Bill Russell did more behind the scenes and sometimes publicly in helping to bring about fairness when it comes to the NBA. Now, look, at the end of the day, if the black players were just better, then, it is what it is. Race shouldn't be part of it. I hate when these reverse racist people say, well, why aren't there more white players in the league? Well, maybe because basketball just isn't their thing in this country. I mean, maybe it's a reason why we haven't seen a great American white player since Larry Bird. Maybe basketball just isn't a sport that white Americans gravitate toward as far as actually playing. And I think you could make an argument that that process started in the 60s. Because we started seeing fewer and fewer great white players. Since we're talking about race here, Gilbert Arenas introduced the spectra of race, so I'm going to talk about this. The last all-white championship team in the NBA was the 1958 St. Louis Hawks, right? And they did have one black player, but they cut him before the playoffs started. After that, starting in 1959, every championship team had a black player. 1960, right? By 1960, 20% of the NBA was black. Not 6 or 7 black players. 20% of the NBA was black. Starting in the 1963-64 season, the Boston Celtics, despite playing one of the most racist cities in America, Boston Celtics of the 60s and 70s were the most progressive franchise in the NBA. They had the first all-black starting lineup. The Boston Celtics, Bill Russell's team, 1963-64, I'm not mistaken. By the time Bill Russell retired, 58% of the NBA was black. Now, you want to know what part of that is? Part of it was the efforts of black players pushing for more fairness. And some of it was just the fact that this quota system that the front office was trying to push, well, we got to have a certain quota of white players. Well, to be competitive in the NBA, they had to get rid of that because the majority of great players coming into the league, save from the Dave DeBuschers and your Rick Barrys. Of course, you had your great white players, but more and more of them were black. So they had to say, you know what, we can't keep doing this. We just got to draft who's ever great and let the chips fall as they may. And when they started doing that, for about 50 years, we had this natural breakdown of 75% black, 20 to 25% white. And that's basically what we've seen ever since. To be honest with you, we've actually seen more white players or non-black players coming to the NBA the last 5 years. Right now, about 70% of the NBA, 69 to 70% of the NBA is black. That's down from when Michael Jordan played 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when it was 75%, close to 80% black, and about 15 to 20% white. So that's all bullshit. Now, having said all this, right? let me tackle into this thing that he's saying about Jokic having better competition at the center position. How do you figure that? How many All-Star centers did Jokic play against this year? I mean, even before this year, who was his main competition at that position? Joel Embiid? Joel Embiid, Anthony Davis whenever he plays center. Giannis is a power forward, so you don't really count him. Although there may be times when he's guarding Jokic. Wemby, right? But this past year, Anthony Davis was hurt a lot. He didn't want to play the center position. Joel Embiid, basically, for all intents and purposes, was MIA for almost all the entire year, save for 20-some games, maybe, right? So, really, who did Jokic play against? Who did he go against that was a comparable center when it comes to size and skill? Or even just size and ability? Or, like I said before, a lot of the players he's going up against are just oversized, stretch fours, masquerading as centers. Whereas Bill Russell, who was 6'9" and 215 when he came out of college, now when he grew into his adult body, he was more around, if you had him in shoes, 6'10" and 240, right? But remember, there were fewer teams then. And after 1965, the last 4 or 5 years of his career, right, when there were 8 to 14 teams, right, you had Wilt Chamberlain, right, Hall of Famer. You had Zelmo Beatty before he switched over to the ABA, Hall of Famer. You had Walt Bellamy, Hall of Famer. You had Willis Reed, Hall of Famer. So that's 4 Hall of Fame big men playing in the NBA. 4 Hall of Fame. That trumps now when there's 30 teams. Not to mention his last year when he came to the NBA. His last year, you have to add Rookie of the Year and MVP. One of the few Rookie of the Years to win MVP, Wes Unseld, right? Who I mentioned in my comment community section. It was 5 years ago we lost him. And you have to add that last year, I'm getting my years, my bearings straight here. Plus, you have to add Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? No. I take it back. Kareem came the year afterwards, so I don't add Kareem. But you do add Elvin Hayes. Elvin Hayes played center with the Houston Rockets. I think at the time of the San Diego Rockets. So altogether, that's what? 6 Hall of Fame big men that Bill Russell went against that were black? What are you talking about? And but with much fewer teams, that meant that he played against those players far more often than the stiffs and the oversized fours that Jokic is going up against. And I'm going to say it before and I'm going to say it again. Jokic is not going to get passes that Wilt Chamberlain did not get. Because Wilt Chamberlain got shit for only winning 2 titles. Now, it's true that Wilt did get more help when he played with the Lakers, right? He got more help. But at least when he played with the Lakers, he was going to the finals every fucking year. 1969, 1970, 1972, 1973, going to the Western Conference in 1971. Whereas Jokic, he has that one fluky year where they play a 7th-seeded, an 8th-seeded Timberwolves team, I think it was. Then the next round they play an overrated 4th-seeded Phoenix Suns team, a team that has failed miserably since they've been put together. Then in the conference finals, he plays a 7th-seeded Laker team. And then in the NBA finals, he plays an 8th-seeded Miami Heat team. No. Wilt's not going to get all this bullshit about putting up big numbers, not winning enough titles. But Jokic gets to put up numbers, and that's good enough. Hell no. But anyway, that's all I got to say about it.